Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. My name is Nang Anis Sofia binti Longlujahan. For my part, I will show you the frontal view of human heart. But before that, let me explain briefly about cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system actually has two parts. Cardio means heart and vascular means blood vessels. There are two types of blood vessels, which are artery and vein. Vein carry deoxygenated blood toward heart, and artery carries oxygenated blood away from the heart. A typical heart is approximately the size of our fist, which is located just behind and slightly left of the breastbone. As you know, heart has four chambers, two atria and two ventricles. So in this diagram, this is right atrium and this is left atrium. At the lower position, this is right ventricle and this is left ventricle. Here I show the image of frontal view of human heart. Starting from the right, we have brachiocephaly artery, superior vena cava, right pulmonary arteries, right pulmonary veins, right atrium, right coronary artery, right ventricle and inferior vena cava. And from top of the left, we have left common carotid artery, left subclavian artery, aorta, left pulmonary arteries, pulmonary trunk, left pulmonary veins, left atrium, left cardiac vein, left ventricle, and apex. The function of the four chambers are: the right atrium receives oxygen poor blood from the body and pumps it to the right ventricle. The right ventricle pumps the oxygen poor blood to the lungs, where it is loaded with oxygen. The left atrium receives oxygen-rich blood from the lung and pumps it to the left ventricle, and the left ventricle, which is the strongest chamber, pumps the oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body. The left ventricle's vigorous contraction creates our blood pressure. I think that's all for my part. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Wanur Fatia binti Wanasri and I'm from Nutrition. Today, I will explain certain part of anterior view of heart. So, let's go. And here is the image of anterior view of heart. First is bronchiocephalus artery. It also known as bronchiocephalus trunk. First branch of aortic arch and reaches up to point near the junction of sternum and right clavicle. Function is to supply blood to the tissue of brain and head. Second is auricle of left atrium. It is also called left atrium epidus. Is a flap of heart wall on the anterior surface of left atrium of heart. It plays important role in pumping of blood within the heart. Third is circumflex arteriosum. Flat branch of the left coronary artery is an artery that branch off from left coronary artery to supply portion of heart with oxygenated blood. With analogous artery, the circumflex artery or other may deform at birth. Such defect can present a great danger to a child as increased risk of heart failure. Fourth is ligamentum arteriosum. Is remnant of ductus arteriosus, a small artery that connects the aortic arch and the pulmonary trunk during embryonic and fetal life. Increased oxygen level in blood after birth cause smooth muscle wall of ductus arteriosus to constrict closing of the pathway. Next is right coronary arteries. Is one of the several major vessels that provide blood to heart. Right coronary artery split into acute marginal arteries and right posterior coronary arteries. Right coronary arteries provide blood to right atrium, heart ventricle, and cell in right atrial wall that called as sinoatrial nodes. The injured to arteries or polyfunctional arteries can cause heart attacks. Last is great cardiac weight, also called the anterointerventricular vein, is large blood vessel formed on the anterior surface of heart. The main function is to contribute the venous drainage of external level of myocardium. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I am Tan Xing Ying and I will be continuing to talk about the pathway of cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular systems includes two circuits, which are the pulmonary circuits and systemic circuits. Pulmonary circuits begins with the pulmonary trunks from the right ventricle, which branches into the two pulmonary arteries that takes the oxygenated blood to the lungs. In lungs, oxygen is diffused into the blood and carbon dioxide diffused out of the blood to expel by the lungs. Lastly, pulmonary veins returns oxygenated blood to the left atrium. While systemic circuit, it starts with aorta carrying oxygenated blood from the left ventricle. The aorta branches with an artery going to the capillaries in body tissue of specific organs. Lastly, from the tissue capillaries, the oxygenated blood returns through a system of veins to the right atrium of heart. This is the diagram of the passage of blood through the heart. Both right and left sides of the heart works together. I will describe the patterns of the pathway, which is repeated over and over, causing the blood to flow continuously to the heart, lungs, and body to supply oxygen and nutrients. Firstly, blood enters the heart through the large veins, which is the inferior and superior vena cava. It empties the deoxygenated blood from the body into the right atriums of heart. As the atriums contracts, blood flows from the right atriums into right ventricles through tricuspid valve. When the ventricle is full, the tricuspid valve shuts. This prevents the blood from flowing backwards into the atriums while the ventricles contracts. As ventricle contracts, blood leaves the heart through pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunks and arteries, then into the lungs where it is oxygenated and gas exchange held. Then, the pulmonary veins empty rich oxygen blood from the lungs into the left atriums of heart. As atriums contracts, blood flows from the left atriums into the left ventricle through bicuspid valve. When ventricle is full, bicuspid valve shuts. This prevents the blood from flowing backwards into the atriums while ventricle contracts. When ventricle contracts, oxygen-enriched blood leaves the heart through the aortic valve into the aorta and arteries and eventually into the veins. And finally, it completes the blood circulations in the body. That's all from me. Thank you so much.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Shaira. So for my part, I'm gonna talk about circulation of blood in arteries and veins. So let's go and watch my video.
Blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. Arteries carry blood that is rich with oxygen except for pulmonary arteries. Look at the flow of blood around the heart. You'll notice that the pulmonary artery carries blood to the lungs. This blood is oxygen poor, or we call it deoxygenated blood. However, when this blood travels through the lungs and back to the heart, it has lots of oxygen. Next, this oxygen-rich blood leaves the heart through an artery and flows throughout the body. Arteries have three main layers. They have an outer layer of connective tissue, a middle layer of smooth muscle, and a very thin layer of endothelial cells. And for the veins, it carry blood towards the heart. Veins are oxygen poor except for pulmonary vein. A vein has three layers of connective tissue, smooth muscle, but it's not as thick as an artery, and a thin layer of endothelial cells. We take a look at the heart again and the flow of blood. The pulmonary vein carries blood from the lungs to the heart, and this blood has lots of oxygen. Arteries and veins are connected by small vessels called capillaries. That's all for me for the arteries and veins part.
The cardiac cycle describes the series of events that occurs during complete heartbeat, the contraction and the relaxation of both the atria and the ventricle. The atria and the ventricle serve to receive the blood that enters the heart and passes it to the ventricle. One cardiac cycle is completed when the heart fills with blood and the blood is pumped out. The phases of the cardiac cycle are two. The phase during which the heart muscles are relaxed and filled with blood is termed the diastole. The other phase, where there is a contraction and blood pumps out of the heart to the arteries, is termed the systole. As the heart beats, it transports blood to the circulatory system of the body. At the beginning of the diastole period, the atria and ventricles relax and the atrioventricular valve or AV open. The oxygenated blood returning from the circulatory system passes through the vena cava, the two largest veins in the body, into the right atrium. Simultaneously, the oxygen-started blood returning from the circulatory system passes through the pulmonary veins and fill the left atrium. The open atrioventricular valve aids the unstrained flow of blood from the atria to the ventricles. The motion from the senatorial node, known as the pacemaker of the heart, that coordinates contraction, send waves that trigger both atria to contract. The contraction spurs the right atrium to empty its content into the right ventricle, and at the same time, the left atrium empties its content into the left ventricle. The valve between the right atrium and the right ventricle, the tricuspid valve, prevent blood from flowing back into the right atrium. The valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle, the mitral valve, prevent blood from flowing back into the left atrium. This process are called the first and second diastole period. The systole. During the systole period, the right ventricle fills with blood transported from the right atrium. The left atrium also fills with blood transported from the left atrium. Fiber branches carrying electrical impulses send impulses to the ventricle, causing them to contract. This causes the anteroventricular valve to close. The semilunar valve, located between the pulmonary and the right ventricle and between the aorta and left ventricle, opens. The contraction of the ventricle allow the oxygen-starved blood from the right ventricle to be pumped to the pulmonary artery, and oxygenated blood in the left ventricle is pumped to the aorta. The pulmonary valve, when closed, prevents blood to flow back to the right ventricle. The aortic valve, when closed, prevents blood to flow back to the left ventricles. The pulmonary artery carries the oxygen-starved blood to the lungs through the pulmonary circuit. The blood picks up oxygen in the lungs, where it is then transported back to the left atrium through the veins, and the aorta serves the oxygenated blood to all parts of the body. These processes are called the first and the second systole period. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.